All right, we are going to get started for the first ever Open Healthcare Conference. This is a super exciting day for Oshawa and hopefully for all of you as well. I just want to welcome you here in this room. I also want to welcome all of the virtual attendees who are out watching this live stream, and I want to give a special welcome to all of those who got their flights canceled last night or this morning trying to come into, I think we had looked up LaGuardia at one point, was just all red with canceled flights. So welcome to those folks as well who I know were planning on being here and couldn't due to the rain. So as I said, this is our first ever Open Healthcare Conference. This is super exciting. I am Alicia Seidle. I'm the Executive Director of the Open Source Hardware Association. We have been around for about 14 years at this point, which is kind of crazy and exciting. So let me tell you a little bit about Oshawa and how we got here. So what on earth is the Open Source Hardware Association? We are stewards of the definition of open source hardware. We didn't write the definition, the community wrote the definition, and they did an awesome job. And so we just put it out there in the world and help people understand what it means. We're also the umbrella or standards organization for open source hardware. So we just kind of double check that people are adhering to open principles. We're the certification holder. So that means that we certify open hardware projects and we kind of verify and double check that all the information's there. We also, through the certification, we get to collect data on our community, which is pretty fantastic because we get to see how the community has grown. And we also clearly, as you are here, organize community events. So what is open source hardware? Just so we're all on the same page, I know you all already know this, but open source hardware is hardware in which you can remix, remake, remanufacture, redistribute, resell, or study and learn from that hardware. If you do open source hardware, you are more than welcome to use this community logo right here. It's like a little gear shape. And that signals to the rest of the world that you are doing open source hardware and that they are allowed to resell your project. They are allowed to study and learn from it all the way down. They're allowed to remix and remake. Okay, so what am I exactly talking about with source? It is anything that somebody else would need to make a copy, right? That is the ultimate test, is can somebody else replicate this? If the answer is yes, then congrats, you have successfully done open source hardware. So what this means is things like schematics or CAD files, even hand drawings. We have an open source hardware hammock. So sometimes it's like fabric, sewing, designs. Any of the things that are up here are all copyrightable, okay? So in order for open source to exist, we need the laws that are couched in intellectual property like copyright and patents so that we can create an alternative for those laws. So the example I have up here is the University of Wisconsin open source face shield, right? So this is one of their diagrams. Yes, you can see that you need bow form, an elastic headband, and a clear shield, and then they go into like, you know, the laser cut designs for this thing and all the specifications and measurements that you would need. All right, and so then if you have created open source hardware and you want to get it certified, we don't force anybody to get certified, but if you want to, we have a certification and that creates this awesome database of all the different things in there. And that really allows us to collect that data that I was talking about. We have over 3,000 projects in our certification database. And like I said, you don't have to, but some of the benefits, if you are, is that you get attribution, and then within the certification, we actually ask if there's a line item that you need for citation. You also get access to, you know, well, everybody gets access to CERN's open hardware licenses, but I think this is like, I like to point out that like CERN has created a bunch of open source licenses, like Large Hadron Collider CERN, right? Like Switzerland CERN, right? Like that CERN, like CERN, right? Huge scientific community. big project. CERN's not going away anytime soon. And they're the ones that created these licenses. And so that is really important and really exciting, that they are the people who are creating the licenses. So we also, the certification and open hardware in general gives you provenance, but the certification enables you to be part of a directory. And so people can find your project there easier. It encourages community and collaboration. It creates prior art, which again, couched in copyright law, prior art is incredibly important for everywhere in the world creating open hardware. It also incentivizes innovation. And the certification specifically has, this third-party validation and verification effect, right? So we actually check over the files. We make sure that they're all there. We make sure that they're all licensed properly, right? And we'll let you know, like, hey, oops, you forgot to license your code. And when you forget to license your code, it automatically goes into copyright instead of having an open license on it. So we'll let you know if it's not licensed properly, if all your source isn't there, we're pretty nice about it. And so this is really what open source hardware does, and the open source hardware certification does for you. So when you think about Oshawa, you can kind of think about us in the way in which we are an alternative to copyright and patent, right? The world that we live in is intellectual property. We are an alternative to the US Patent and Trade Office because we are a US nonprofit. However, wherever you are in the world, you also most likely have a patent and trade office. So it functions the same internationally as it does here. So we do try to take care of everyone globally. And in the certification, you also get a country code so that we also can kind of gather that information as well. All right. Okay, so why are we doing this whole open healthware thing? So we started noticing people were emailing us and being like, hey, your certification doesn't have like health or bio or medical category. What's up with that? And we honestly thought those people would never be interested in certifying as open source hardware. And this makes it tricky to get that data without that category there specifically. But we have 79 current health items that we could find, right? We might be missing some because, again, without the category that people have been self-selecting, we kind of had to do some digging. And 75% of those are in the database are for humanitarian aid. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to pull out, that a lot of the people doing open healthware are doing it for distributed manufacturing so that somebody else can quickly make a copy and utilize it for humanitarian aid. So we were curious, and I know our team has pulled out kind of all the interesting parts to them that they have heard from our community so far. So we've had these workshops with participants, and our participants have told us, hey, in the source, it's really important that the sterilization plan is included. It's really important that there are device legacy plans. So when a company goes out of business, we know what the plan was with that legacy. Really important to have testing docs and regulatory files within their source. And then there's also like these really fascinating things I've learned about historical sort of non-patent points, right? So generics, think about generics, right? We already have a map to open source within medical with generic drugs. These are drugs that just don't have their patent on them anymore, right? They have gone out of the 17-year mark for patents. Seatbelts are another one. Seatbelts. I mean, not specifically maybe how we would think of a medical device, but certainly safety, things that help human health. They recognized that was so important and so life-saving. They said anybody can use this patent. This is too important. Insulin in Canada, that patent was sold for $1 so that anybody could have access to it. Unfortunately, here in the US, we have sort of, a different, concept around that. So we have some repeated strong justifications. The most important one of these, I think, is that people do not want us to be the FDA, and whew, thank goodness. Because again, we are tied a little more to IP and not at all to health and safety and efficacy within that. So we do not want to be the FDA. We know that all the open healthware should go through a regulatory body if it needs to. And our stakeholders have told us this repeatedly. And also, interesting point, open and closed business models seem to be incredibly similar for health hardware. All right, so we want to recognize that IP is not about quality. So this is my garbage can, and we live in a place where there's bears. No bear has ever attacked this garbage can. However, this patent pending up there, right? This is the third time that we've had to replace our garbage can this year because it just falls off all the time, right? So not about quality, mapped to the healthcare industry. We also understand like insulin, right? There are two companies that have patents on insulin. And what happens is we have people doing protests in this country over die-ins because people cannot purchase their insulin because insulin prices are too high. Pulse oximeters do not work on people with darker skin, right? How much data are we just sort of letting go or doing wrong because these devices were never meant to work with certain people or because patents have stood in the way of cheap enough medicine. So again, we want to recognize that patents are not about quality. The USPTO does not give a patent based on quality. But there is hope. Just want to run through a few examples. Field Ready is an amazing organization, another nonprofit that does humanitarian aid devices all over the world, all open source hardware. Open source hardware medical supplies is a fantastic database, all open source hardware items in here. These are all gowns that I pulled, hospital gowns. Eubora is an international group that also has a database for biomedical engineering. And Glia is an open hardware business that is selling these items currently out of Canada. And so, with, social media splintering and whatnot, like here's all of our social media now. So take a picture of these QR codes. They'll also be up at the end. And then I need everybody to take your phones out right now. These aren't the super important ones, but you can, of course, follow us on social media. But are you guys ready? Is everybody ready? Okay. Oh, thank you for the dermal. All right, we have a survey that we really want everybody to take. We'll be bugging you with this all day long, we promise. This is our survey. This is kind of a culmination of the first 3 workshops that we have done and the data that we have collected from them. But we really want folks to take this survey because this is like sort of, here's the data we found from participants, and now we want to make sure that that data is correct across the rest of the participants who haven't attended our meetings and across the globe. So that is our survey. Thank you all for taking pictures of that. And I just want to say this work is financially supported by the National Science Foundation, so thank you very much to them for the finances. But this work is emotionally supported by you all, and so thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of this community. We're super excited to work with you and to build with you.